Welcome to UFC 145 in the rear view. In these videos, I'll go back to some classic fight cards and look back on the stories around the event and what happened in the careers of the fighters afterwards. Right off the bat, I want to let you know that due to licensing issues, mainly not wanting to get these videos taken down by the UFC, all the photos and artworks have been obtained under Creative Commons licenses. If you think one of the images belong to you, please get in touch with me directly and we'll sort it out. This card was headlined by Jon Jones against Sugar Rashad Evans. This was Jon Jones' first real grudge match. Evans was training at Jackson Wink Camp when Jon arrived. Evans was like a big brother to Jones, but when Evans got injured before a title match, it was Jon who replaced him, and Jones beat Shogun in that match. Evans had established the Black Zillion team just prior to this match, and in the primetime TV shows that aired in the week before the pay-per-view, the Octagon was just being installed at the gym. So that's how new the team was. The Black Zillions recently went their own way, but for a short time they enjoyed the status of the elite group of super gyms in MMA. Also on the card was Rory McDonald against Shay Mills. Ben Rothwell fought Brendan Schaub. Welterweight contender Stephen Thompson fought Matt Browne, and Travis Browne won by submission. After we've run through the fights and what happened further down the road, we'll look at the numbers around the pay-per-view event. Before the weigh-ins on Friday, Mike Goldberg hosted a Q&A with Chael Sonnen. Chael was there promoting his book, The Voice of Reason, a VIP path to enlightenment, and his Anderson Silva rematch. If you've never read Chael's book, it's a very entertaining read. He was in full Ric Flair mode, and most of the crowd joined in, cutting wrestling-style promos. It was very light-hearted, and for the time, a real departure from most UFC promotion. Now with the success of Chael and Conor, a lot more fighters are being more of an entertainer. There was a question about how traditional martial artists should be more respectful, but Chael batted it away, blaming Hollywood for giving people the wrong impression about how respectful traditional martial artists were. Either way, trash talk is here to stay, it seems. Goldberg did a much better job at the Q&A than he did with the Facebook intros. Remember before Fight Pass, when they'd show two fights live on Facebook? Those were the days. Well, Goldie introduced the show as UFC 125 before messing up Evans' name and cursing, much to Rogan's amusement. The card opened up with a very forgettable bout between Marcus Brimage and Maximo Blanco. Brimage got the nod in a 29-28, 29-28, 28-29 split decision. The most memorable moment coming at the end of the bout when both fighters engaged in a bit of a shuffling match, followed by each of them doing backflips. If they had poured that energy into the fight, I think they would have felt more love from the crowd. The win took Brimage to a respectable 5-1 as a fighter. Next time out, he beat Jimmy Hedis, but then he came into contact with the rising star of one Conor McGregor. He lost another one and won one again in the Octagon before coming up against another rising star in the shape of current bantamweight champion Cody Garbrandt. He lost to Jimmy Rivera before leaving the UFC, and then he has lost his last two fights to take his losing skid to 4 and overall record to 7-7. Still in his early 30s, he could be rejuvenated and return to the spotlight, but the odds are against it. His opponent, Maximo Blanco, hasn't fared much better, picking up an equal number of wins and losses, all in the UFC. The only fight of any real note being his controversial 16-second TKO of Mike De La Toro, a fight he missed weight for by 3.5 pounds. Currently on a 2-fight losing streak, it remains to be seen where he will go from here. The last prelim fight was Chris Clements against Keith Vishnevsky. Another split decision where the loser fought one last time, again before retiring. Chris Clements would lose to Matt Riddle, a decision that was switched to a no contest after Riddle failed a drug test due to marijuana. He then lost to Stephen Thompson, went 1-1 in his following fights before being released from the UFC. He hasn't fought since. The first 3 fights on the FX card also went to decision. However, they were all unanimous decisions, the first of which being Mac Danzig over Efrain Escudo. After the win, Danzig dropped 3 in a row before hanging up his gloves. There were 3 very respectable competitors though: Takanori Gomi, Melvin Gillard, and Joe Lozon. Escudo has been a very active fighter, fighting 14 times since. He has been in and out of the UFC again, fought in RFA and Bellator, as well as 6 other organizations. the highlight being getting a win over Drew Dober in his native Mexico. He's currently on a 2-fight win streak and has just turned 31, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him back in the octagon again. Anthony Njokuani beat John Makdessi in his penultimate win. He lost immediately after this to Rafael dos Anjos before beating Roger Bowling, and then lost his last 5. He has a brother who fights in Bellator, but it might be the end of the line for him. Paradoxically, Makdessi won 4 of his next 5 bouts before losing to Donald Cerrone and then Yancy Medeiros. He won 1 before losing via wheel kick KO to Lando Venata at UFC 206. Sometimes you become famous for getting kicked in the face. Just ask Terriata. This brings up the Matt Browne win over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. This was a great fight. It didn't win fight of the night. That honor went to Eddie Yagin versus Mark Hominick, but a very interesting back and forth battle that left both fighters' stock higher than when they started. This was very important for Matt Browne. He had a record of 12-11 before he beat Chris Cope in the fight prior to this. This fight against Wonderboy was the second win in a streak of 7 fights, the best by far of his career. It led him all the way to a fight against Robbie Lawler, which he lost. Then he lost to ex-champion Johnny Hendricks before beating Tim Means. Currently, he's on a 3-fight losing streak against Damian Maia, Jake Ellenberger, and Donald Cerrone. Matt still has a role in the UFC, but probably more as a gatekeeper than looking towards the gold. Stephen Thompson, by contrast, has gone from strength to strength. His last fight being a draw against welterweight champion Tyrone Woodley, a match that will be run back at UFC 209. Thompson beat the co-main event winner Rory McDonald, sending him out of the UFC and over to Bellator. It was an important night for Wonderboy, as this was his first loss in both kickboxing, where he had 57 contests, and MMA. There was talk that the karate practitioners couldn't hack it in modern MMA. Jon Jones had brought the Machida era to a chilling end with his standing guillotine, but the rising Wonderboy and Michael Venom Page has brought the utility of karate strikes back to the fore of high-level MMA. The fight was interesting because many thought Browne would take him down and grind it out. That wasn't quite how it played out. Stephen Thompson did well on the ground after being taken down in the first. In the second round, it was Matt Browne impressing with the stand-up, not Wonderboy. The round did end with Wonderboy on the ground getting pummeled, returning to his stool with cuts on his forehead and both cheeks. A bloody mess. The final round was fairly even until Browne tripped Wonderboy. He first had him in a crucifix, then mounted triangle, from which he did more than enough to win the fight. In his post-fight interview, Matt Browne claimed to have been knocked out twice on his feet. This match showed the heart and toughness and warrior spirit of both of these guys. This is why you watch the undercard and don't just tune in for the main event like boxing. The final fight before the pay-per-view card was Travis Browne against Chad Griggs. Browne was fighting out of Jackson Wink Camp at the time and was seen by many as the next big thing in the heavyweight division. He had great footwork, monster power, and on this night he won via arm triangle, his only submission victory in the UFC. His opponent, Chad Griggs, was no joke. He was 11-1 with victories over Bobby Lashley, Valentin Overeem, and Gene Valente. But after this fight, he dropped another one to Cyril Diabate before retiring. Travis Browne has an even record of 5 wins and 5 defeats since. He lost to Bigfoot Silva before going on an impressive 3-fight win streak over Gabriel Gonzaga, Alistair Overeem, and Josh Barnett. He has beaten Brendan Schaub and Mitrione since, the latter being controversial due to a horrific eye poke injury suffered by Mitrione. He's lost to 3 former champs, Verdum twice, Arlovsky, and Cain Velasquez. There is some positive news in his career that he's moved on from Glendale Fight Club and joined Black House. This is a heavyweight who gives heavyweights nightmares. If he can get back to where he was, moving his feet, hitting big power shots, and maybe even submissions, the title shot could be a few fights away for him. After beating John Alessio, Mark Bocek lost to Rafael dos Anjos before beating Mike De La Toro and then retired via Twitter. John Alessio has fought 5 times since, winning only once with 2 no contests. The last no contest being his last fight. He was hit by an illegally. It might be the last act of a warrior who is now in his late 30s. Eddie Yagin beat Mark Hominick in the fight of the night. It was his last win and he retired after dropping his next 2 fights. Hominick suffered 1 more loss before hanging up his gloves. It was a 4-fight losing streak that started back at UFC 129 when he lost to Jose Aldo for the featherweight title. Michael McDonald scored an impressive KO victory over former WEC champ Miguel Torres. McDonald was seen as part of the new breed of fighters, along with Rory McDonald and Jon Jones, probably the future of the UFC. He certainly had the attributes, and off this win he earned himself a title shot against Renan Burrell. He was just 21 years old on the night and is still incredibly young, but he has been hampered by injuries in recent years. He lost to Burrell, who was considered as one of the pound-for-pound best fighters, before rebounding with a win over tough veteran Brad Pickett. He lost against Uriah Faber before picking up a win and then losing his last outing to John Lineker. After the loss, Miguel Torres headed over to World Series of Fighting, losing twice before he left that organization. He then won 3 and lost 2 and won his last bout in September 2016. I don't know what the future holds for Michael McDonald, but few have his experience at his age. Next up was Big Ben Rothwell KOing Brendan Schaub. Schaub was doing well, winning the stand-up battle, but he rushed in rather carelessly, got caught by a few shots and ended up on his back, clawing at the air after being KO'd. Shaw won his next 2 against LeVar Johnson and Matt Mitrione, before losing to Arlovsky and getting KO'd by Travis Browne. He had also been KO'd by Big Country Roy Nelson on the TUF finale. He was talked into retiring by his friend and UFC commentator Joe Rogan in a brutally honest podcast. Schaub has managed to move on successfully into podcasting with Brian Callen and is moving further into entertainment with a string of successful live shows and podcasts such as his Big Browne Breakdowns. Ben Rothwell remains a contender at heavyweight in the UFC, having won 4 of 6 since UFC 145. He lost his subsequent match to Gabriel Gonzaga before going on an impressive 4-fight winning streak, beating Brandon Vera, Alistair Overeem, Matt Mitrione and Josh Barnett, before falling to Junior Dos Santos. He is still likely 1 or 2 wins away from a title shot, but the lack of talent at heavyweight makes it seem that he could still reach the peak of the mountain. Che Mills, who was known as a vicious striker before the bout, started off very well, some hard leg kicks, and was winning the stand-up battle until Rory took him down. Rory unleashed some ferocious ground and pound before slipping into side control. Rory controlled the remainder of the first round, transitioning through mount, taking the back, and all the while delivering punishing blows to Mills' swollen head. The second round didn't go much better. A simple, all-too-easy takedown followed by Rory controlling him and unleashing nasty shots on the ground. It isn't hard to see why so many people were so high on Rory. Him and Jon Jones and Michael McDonald really could have been the future of the UFC. After this, Che Mills got a UFC win against fellow striker Dwayne Bang Ludwig in the UK, but then he lost to Matt Riddle. We've heard this story before as well, and it was overturned due to a no contest after Riddle failed his drug test due to marijuana. He lost 4 of his next 6 with the only one win and another no contest. Rory went on to do well with 5 wins in 7, only losing to Robbie Lawler. In that run, he beat the top contender Damian Maia, current champ Tyron Woodley, and MMA legend BJ Penn. After he lost one of the greatest title fights ever to Robbie Lawler, he lost again to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He has since left the UFC and signed for Bellator. The first thing they did was give him time off to heal up a nose injury. I still have high hopes for the Red King and wouldn't be surprised to see him pick up multiple belts in Bellator before triumphantly returning to the UFC. That brings us to the main event. Former training partners, former champ versus current champ, the first 2 black belt Gaido Jutsu fighters to face off in a UFC main event for the ages. It started out somewhat tentatively, and an even first round was possibly stolen by Evans' head kick late on. It rocked Bones, but he had regained his composure at the buzzer. The second round was a different story, as Jones landed some standing elbows and a few flying knees. This continued in the third, but the fourth and fifth petered out. The only real notable point being that at the end of the fight, Jones pulled guard, but it was much too late for Evans to do anything. After the fight, many suggested that Evans should transition to 185. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and if he fights again in the UFC, it looks like he'll finally make his debut at 185. Evans has continued to suffer from injuries and has only fought 5 times since 185, losing 3 and winning twice. He's never really looked like the guy who KO'd Chuck Liddell, and while at 185 he might avoid Jones, DC and Rumble, I doubt he'll fare much better against Romero, Gastelum or Rockhold. He's very articulate and I wouldn't be surprised to see him on MMA programming more after his retirement. Jon Jones has had a litany of personal problems since 145. A month after the event, he got a DUI for crashing his Bentley, and it's continued to go downhill from there. He has, to his credit, not lost in the octagon, only being stripped of his belt and interim title due to suspensions. Jon is his own worst enemy, and for a guy who is arguably the best ever to compete, the old saying is true, he can only beat himself. Many thought by 2017 he would be reigning over the heavyweight division, and that could still happen, but it won't happen this year. As far as the numbers go, it's really surprising just how much money the UFC made in comparison to the athlete. The official attendance was 15,545 for a gate of 2.2 million. The reported salaries were 1.5 million. The most of that was paid to the main eventers. This doesn't cover undisclosed payments and bonuses, the fighter sponsors, as this was pre-Reebok. Actually, an interesting tidbit I didn't mention was that UFC sponsored Jon Jones for this fight. The media made a lot of out of this, but Evans didn't seem too bothered by it. It certainly was unusual, but I would compare it to boxers wearing a patch for their promoters. Anyway, even before the pay-per-view numbers, the UFC is making profit. Okay, the event cost money to put on, but I doubt it cost $700,000. Coincidentally, they sold 700,000 pay-per-views. And that was at a minimum of $45 per pay-per-view, not taking into account bars or HD pay-per-views. So as a minimum, they would have made $31.5 million. Let's say they split that 50-50 with the pay-per-view providers. Then they have 15,750,000. But okay, let's be generous to the UFC and say that they're paying 50% tax on that, which they weren't, but let's pretend that they did. That's still 7,875,000. That's 5 times more than athletes. Even after all their costs, I'm not a massive believer into guys getting new contracts every time they fight, but it's hard to take that as a fan, let alone a fighter, that the organization is making 5 times profit what the fighters are just taking home as their salary. You know, this isn't even considering that they've got to pay their camps and they've got to pay for their taxes as well. The card didn't break any records, not even close, but it did well. They had 3 primetime shows in the run-up to the event, the first garnering 462,000 views, the second 573,000 views, and the last one 646,000 views. The kind of primetime show has been replaced by the embedded videos, but maybe a return to primetime TV shows in the run-up to the pay-per-views would help garner some better numbers. In conclusion, the star that has emerged from 145 wasn't one of the winners on the night, not even one of the new breed, but Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Jones and both McDonalds can still finish on top, but they aren't there at the moment, and UFC 145 is now in the rear view.